watching all that with me here has been Peter Hennessy, Professor of Contemporary History. It's a big contemporary event. And we've been joined by Nick Robinson, BBC's political editor. And as we're watching these pictures, what would you say, Peter, about the event?
It brings out the gift we have as a country for rites of passage, the ceremony, the choreography of these occasions, and the poetry of the words and the music. We do seem to have without wanting to sound self-congratulatory, we do seem to be naturals when it comes to this, and it is a great rite of passage, this, where everyone stood as an individual on Mrs. Thatcher and her ism. This is an extraordinary event, and in a strange way she now passes into the hands of historians. Dr. Johnson once said, the fame which had once spanned the world ends up in cloisters and quadrangles. And it's intriguing to speculate how the long view of history will regard her. But on one thing I'm certain, she'll be there.
The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh get into their limousine, flying the Royal Standard, and they'll be on their way. And Nick Robinson, how well do you think this whole morning of the ceremonial and then the service has managed to bridge that gap between Lady Thatcher, the woman, the family we're talking about, and the Bishop was talking about, and Lady Thatcher, the political activist who arouses such a confusion of opinion, with many people very hostile to what's the very thing that's been happening here?
Well, I had a sense that the Bishop of London in his sermon, above all, wanted to do that, didn't he? He talked about the gap between the mythological figure, the figure of the ism, Thatcherism, and Margaret Hilda Thatcher, the real Margaret Hilda Thatcher, as he said. He said at times that it would be difficult for her family to recognise the wife, the mother, the grandmother in the mythological figure. But he was a little more political than that, David. He didn't just remind us with some nice stories about the young boy who'd written a letter to her at Downing Street that she'd replied to, that she was once a scientist who worked on developing Mr. Whippy's ice cream. But he also went back over the words, one of the most controversial phrases she'd ever used, there's no such thing as society, and said they'd been misunderstood, quoted another speech that she'd given, and tried to explain in terms of Christian thinking that it was, first and foremost, individuals that counted.
Sir Mark Thatcher and his wife, and the rest of the family. Take their leave, and behind in the cathedral still that great gathering of politicians and soldiers, the great and the powerful, and then among them the two New Zealand women who looked after Lady Thatcher in her final years, Crawford, her great close friend who was with her for a long, long time and really more intimate with her perhaps than anybody, who's talked a bit about her and the jokes she made, but really clearly knows what Lady Thatcher was like in those years. Cynthia Crawford is there in the centre with the black hat. The person to her right pointed something out. Cynthia Crawford, who had told a wonderful story about late one evening, Baroness Thatcher, Lady Thatcher said to her, you better have a drink. She said, I'll have a gin and tonic. She said, no dear, you can't drink a gin and tonic at this time of night. You have to drink whiskey and soda. Very insistent.
That was the moment that made suddenly the service laugh, wasn't it, when the Bishop of London told a similar story about how she'd taken his arm at some reception, said, don't have the duck pate, it's very fattening, and everybody could hear in that.
There in the centre, Lord Carrington, who was her Foreign Secretary at the time of the Falklands and who resigned over the Argentinian invasion of the Falklands.
One of the last truly honourable resignations. And his memory goes back to Winston Churchill, right through the spectrum of Conservative Prime Ministers.
David Steele and David Owen, the people who formed the alliance of Liberals and Social Democrats that's emerged now as the Liberal Democrats. Sir Bernard Ingham there, leaning forward with the red hair. Sir Bernard Ingham, who's a staunch, stout defender of her, still is vociferous, angry, often spirited Yorkshireman, who puts up with no nonsense from anybody.
When
you have any run-ins with him?
I didn't actually, but when we correspondents used to say Downing Street says, what we meant was Sir Bernard, and he was a louder echo of Margaret Thatcher.
And Charles Pole, a close advisor there on the left, sitting next to the Duchess of York, Fergie, if I'm not mistaken. Can't mistake that hair.
Charles Pole, of course, one of an extraordinary pairing, because his brother then went on to be Tony Blair's Chief of Staff. He was Foreign Affairs Advisor to Margaret Thatcher.
Charles said she was a dreadnought amongst a fishing fleet last week. Did you hear that?
Yes, yes.
Very good.
Yes.
I thought the most powerful image, David, that we've seen now is this extraordinary image of the monarch watching the coffin of a politician, if I may say a mere politician, as it were, in British constitutional terms, being taken away. There was all this debate about whether it was a state funeral. It wasn't. It was a ceremonial funeral, but it was an extraordinary sight to see just behind us on the steps of St Paul's, the monarch waiting.
Boris Johnson there sitting next to Michael Howard. Yes, of course, it is interesting in that way. It's also a celebration of a politician by politicians. I mean, it was the political class who chose to have this service. It was they, not just the present administration, but Gordon Brown, who agreed to the gun carriage, and before that Tony Blair, who had all the arrangements across his desk. So, in a way, quite difficult for them. I mean, what do you make? Every ambassador loves an ambassador. Every politician loves a politician. You know, they wanted politics to be seen as a through Mrs. Thatcher's life, as a noble calling, whatever you thought of the policies. That's really what this has been about.
I think it's a recognition everybody feels that she changed the jet stream of British politics. It will never return to the pre-1979 configurations and patterns, and I think they all recognise that.
There's Norman Lamont in the middle there. I think, yes, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Major's Chancellor, John Major's Chancellor.
John Major's Chancellor, yes, yes. Dame Shirley Bassey, one of the many distinguished guests, the very recognisable figure of Jeremy Clarkson on the left there, who I think is very sympathetic to her political point of view. Simon Weston from the Welsh Guards. Welsh Guards played a very big part here today, not only with Garrison Sergeant Major Bill Mott, his brother, and also all the route liners that were formed from the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards, and the Guard of Honour here. So a last word about this, just in the historical context, Peter.
Well, I think one thing we can be sure of, more of Margaret Thatcher, her way of doing politics, her personality, will cling to the Velcro of our collective national memory than any politician of recent times.
I think we're very unlikely to ever see in our lifetimes an event of this sort. We may never see an event of this sort for a politician in this way. Clearly the exact nature of the funeral divided, and yet the essential somberness of the occasion came through, didn't it? The muffled bells, and to see the Chancellor wipe away a tear from his cheek at one point.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Chancellor of the Exchequer appeared to... Now, we all know if we've lost a loved one, we can't be sure whether the tear was for Mrs. Thatcher or some personal memory that any one of us could have in a service of that sort. But it was striking, David, that it happened. But one note against that, The cheers from the crowd here, again and again, they cheered, they broke into applause, as if they wanted to say, after all this contention and debate, we're here to cheer you on your last journey.
I talked to them, and they're her friends and admirers here at St. Paul's. Anyway, thank you both very much for coming in and watching it, and our other guests who are here. It was the leader of the opposition, Ed Miliband, speaking in the House of Commons, who described Lady Thatcher as a towering figure. And it's perhaps that one word that best explains this ceremonial funeral we've seen today. Politicians of many parties, despite their political differences, have come here to honour what they consider to be, and the public accepts, is a towering political figure. One who still inspires mixed emotions, but who, as Britain's first woman Prime Minister, dominated the political scene and was admired for that from around the world. President Obama paid tribute to the way that she'd made, in his words, made Britain, shown Britain how to be at her best. And it's the politician rather than the policies that have been commemorated here, very much so. The policies will be the subject of controversy for many years to come, as all political policies are. But no one, I think, will forget the woman who, with single-minded determination, won 3 elections in a row to impose her will on this country for over a decade. From St. Paul's Cathedral, good afternoon.